All right, and so everybody, thanks so much for joining us. We are here with Carly Skonnord, Berkeley Humane's Pet Program Manager and animal behavior expert, who has got just a fantastic set of presentation about how you can learn more about what your dog is saying to you. And thank you again to Subaru for supporting all of these Make a Dog's Day presentations. And so Carly, will turn it over to you.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name's Carly Skonnord. I'm Pet Program Manager at Berkeley Humane, and I'm so excited to be here with you guys this morning to talk about reading your dog's body language. Animal body language is one of my favorite subjects, so I hope you find this presentation useful. So we're going to go over a few things today, starting with just some basics of how to read a dog's body language effectively. We'll talk about some specifics, like things dogs do when they're stressed, things a lot of dogs do when they're happy, and some pieces of behavior that might be a little easy for people to misread. We're going to touch just a little bit on cat body language and go over some tips for bringing a new pet into your home when you already have pets. And finally, we're going to talk about what healthy, appropriate play between dogs looks like. Now, before we get into details, I want to talk a little bit just about the nature of reading dog body language. Getting fluent in dog body language really is like learning a new language, and you have to practice to become fluent. So you can look at these little signs that we're going over, but until you really start noticing them on dogs out in your life and getting used to what their body overall is looking like when you're picking up on these signs, then you'll really be able to read what dogs are saying. I like to think of it in terms of reading humans' facial expression and body language. When you go up to your friend, you don't think, oh, the sides of her mouth are turned down, her eyebrows are furrowed. That must mean she's upset. You just see her face and know that that is the face of an upset person. And you can get to that point with reading animals' body language. And if you do that, it will strengthen the communication between you and your pets and strengthen that bond so much. It's really kind of magical. So we can go ahead and dive right in. Just take a minute to look at these pictures of these 4 dogs and kind of think to yourself what your initial impression is of what they might be saying with their body language. If there's anything you notice that stands out to you, make a note of that and just think about it for a second. Okay, so from here, we're going to start out with some really common stress signals, things dogs will do when they're uncomfortable or maybe just a little upset or nervous. Some really common ones are if dogs will flick their tongue by licking their nose, the side of their lips, the air, or if they're yawning in any other context from basically waking up from a nap. These are 2 of the most common first things dogs will do to communicate that they're uncomfortable, but they can be easy for people to miss because they are so subtle in terms of how we communicate. But noticing a little tongue flick or a little stress yawn might be the first thing your dog's doing to tell you that it's unhappy. And that'll give you the opportunity to help them with what they need before they become more stressed. Another thing that you'll see really commonly for dogs who are nervous or tense is just a lot of tightness in their face. And what that looks like is they'll pin their ears really far unnaturally back. And a lot of times you can see them pulling their lips back too. Now that one can be a little confusing because in some cases it looks like they're smiling like a person. And understandably, that might read as a happy dog when you look at their face. But in reality, that's them trying to tell you that something's wrong. Now, you can tell a lot from animals' eyes. One thing to really look out for is if dogs get eyes that are really wide and really round to the point where you can see the whites around their irises. This is what we call whale eye, and it tends to be an indication of a dog who's really stressed or really scared. So take that as a warning that they're uncomfortable, and that they could go on to become defensive, if whatever's making them uncomfortable continues. What You also will see dogs doing what kind of looks like their eyes are worried, like their forehead's a little wrinkled. I also call it triangle eyes because the rims of their eyes almost look like it's shaped like a triangle. And that might mean that they're a little unsure of their surroundings or whatever's going on. Now, when dogs get really still or really stiff, that can be another one that's hard to pick up on because you see a dog that isn't moving much, and you might think, oh, they aren't doing a whole lot. They're probably relaxed and calm because they're still. But in actuality, a dog who is very still might be very uncomfortable. Think of a situation where you're nervous, you're unsure of yourself, or you might be a little scared. You'll probably be really cautious with your movements, move slowly. I mean, think of it in terms of if you go into an amusement park, when you first go through the gate, you're probably moving around and laughing and gesturing with your arms. But then think of if you go into a haunted house, assuming that haunted houses are remotely scary for you. When you walk through the rooms, you're not going to have that same loose movement. You're probably going to be moving slow, kind of have your shoulders hunched, just stiff, because you're more on guard, you're more aware of your surroundings and prepared to react to something. So a dog who stops moving, or especially a dog who's almost statue-like still, pay attention to that because that's a dog who could be really nervous and probably needs some space. Another thing dogs will do to politely disengage from interaction is to turn away. And this can be as subtle as avoiding eye contact, not wanting to look at someone's face, to turning their head away, or turning their entire body away from someone. And it makes sense. If they want attention, they'll make that contact. They'll look at you. They'll lean into you. So if they're orienting their look and body away from you, that's just a really polite sign that they are saying, no, thank you. So now take a look at these dogs again and see if there's anything new that you notice. I would say that all of these dogs are uncomfortable, nervous, stressed. You can see that the brown dog has an obvious tongue flick going. The white dog on the bottom left, you can see some whites of her eyes. And I want to look a little closer at two of these pictures. Now, this is a really nervous puppy. You can see that she has that tension in the eyes. She has the triangle eyes, and they're really wide. She has some of that whale eye going. Her ears are pulled really far back to the point where you can hardly even see them. And just look at the tension in her face and mouth. You can just tell that she's not relaxed. There's a lot of rigidity in her facial expression, and her lips are a little tight and pulled back too. Now take a look at this dog. And I like this picture as a demonstration because when I took this picture, the dog was coming up to me and looking straight at me. So it might stand to reason that she was engaging with me, wanting to be friendly because she was coming up and making that contact. But in reality, I don't think she was saying that she wanted interaction. You can see a lot of tension in her face and body. Her muscles just look extremely rigid. There's none of that like loose, wrinkly factor to her skin that we see in dogs who are really happy. And her body is very stiff, very straight, and her feet are just firmly planted. You can see that her ears are pulled as far back as they'll go. And her lips are pulled back pretty tight too. The tension in her face is just very apparent, I think. And she has that whale eye going too. So when looking at that body language, even though she's coming up to me, which I'm pretty confident she was coming up to me because I had treats, it's not a dog who I would engage in a lot of contact or affection with because I know in her body language, she is not inviting me to do so. So we can look at some dogs who are a bit happier. Take a look again at these 4 dogs. And if there's anything in particular you notice about them, make a note of it in your mind. Hopefully the first thing you'll notice is that there aren't any of those stress signals that we just went over for any of the 4. The biggest thing to look for in dogs is that loose face and body, the absence of that tension that we saw in the dogs who are more stressed. And you can see in the picture in the middle, that dog is just flopped over. There is no great thought to what he's doing with his body. He's just very relaxed, enjoying the moment, enjoying his toy pretzel. And you can see the fact that he's just kind of splayed out. It means he's comfortable where he is, which is great. And the dogs on the side are soliciting that interaction. They're making contact with me. The dog on the left, you can see she's really leaning into the pet. You can see some of that loose wrinkle in her face and her body. She seems happy. She has, her eyes are nice and not really wide. And the dog on the right, who is a dog I know really well, she is completely loose and relaxed and just leaning into me voluntarily. So really try to pay attention to dogs that you come across in your day-to-day life and start just making a quick assessment in your mind of, are they tense or is their body language loose? And if you learn to recognize that as soon as you look at a dog, that's going to take you really far in having a good understanding of their body language. In general, if a dog has their ears forward, they're probably not particularly upset. The 3 dogs in this picture have very different types of ears, but you can see none of them are really pinned back. They're all relatively forward. Now, ears forward can also mean that a dog is really focused on something. Like if they want to chase something or get a toy, their ears might be pricked forward. But the takeaway from this is just to make a note of, are the dog's ears pinned back or not? And try to think of what that might mean. So in contrast to the whale eye and the worried triangle eye that was in the stress signal slides, dogs who are relaxed will have what we call soft eyes. And that pretty much just means that they're not doing anything in particular with their eyes. They'll be a little squinty. There won't be tension around their eyelids. You shouldn't see the whites of their eyes. Some dogs, you can naturally see the whites of their eyes, but if you can't when they're just going about their daily life, then you shouldn't be able to see it. And they might be really blinky. Friendly dogs who are comfortable with people usually blink every 3 to 5 seconds. So if you notice that a dog is not blinking very much, especially if they're staring, that might be a sign that they are a little uncomfortable. And on the note of eyes too, I want to mention that when dogs stare, it tends to be a threat of some degree. It's a very offensive behavior. So if you see a dog really locking eyes onto someone or another dog, that's not a friendly invitation and you should be cautious with that. And it's important to be aware of how you're conducting yourself with your eyes when you're interacting with dogs too. Because if you accidentally lock eyes with a dog and are staring at them, they might misread that as a threat. So instead, make an effort to have your eyes mimic what you want their eyes to look like. Make sure you're blinking a lot, look away every once in a while, just avoid holding really solid eye contact with them so they can read that you're saying, I'm friendly, you don't have to be worried about me. So take another look at these happy dogs. We don't need to go into any specific breakdown of these 4 because they all have the same body language. Their ears are all forward. They all have really soft eyes. You can see the relaxation in their faces and in their bodies. A lot of times when dogs are relaxed and happy, they'll open their mouth a little bit, like the 2 on the bottom. But a dog doesn't necessarily need to be opening their mouth to show that they're happy. It's just something some dogs do. So take a moment to look at these 4 pictures of, believe it or not, the same dog. The pictures on the left are the first time we met Clementine at the municipal shelter that we pulled her from. And the pictures on the right are a picture of her in her home. Now, she did do some growing up, obviously, but the biggest difference is just her comfort level in that environment, and it really shows in her face and body. She was a shy dog in general, and she was really upset in the setting that she was in. Very noisy and scary for her. So you can see in the pictures on the left, she is exhibiting every stress signal that she can. Her ears are tucked really tightly back. She has a lot of worry and tension in her face. Her body is kind of tucked up and really still. And that's a big tongue flick that she's doing in the bottom picture. Now, look at the pictures on the right, where her ears are forward, her body is relaxed. I especially like comparing the top two pictures because she's in just about the same position in both photos, but you can see a world of difference in how she's holding her body. In the picture on the right, she's totally relaxed. She's just kind of splayed out as is comfortable for her. And you can see some definition to her face because she's not holding it really tight. She's not pulling her lips back like she is in the picture on the left. So this is just a good demonstration of how much a body language can affect how a dog looks and how much there is to recognize in the body language they choose. And of course, more than anything, it's a testament to what a good home really will do to a dog and how much it can change them for the better. So we're going to talk about just a couple of body language signals that are understandably a little difficult for people to read. I'm sure everyone here knows that happy dogs wag their tail, which is true. But does a dog who's wagging their tail necessarily mean they're happy? Sometimes, not all the time. Dogs will wag their tails for all sorts of different reasons. When dogs fight or hunt, they will wag their tail. When dogs are really scared, they might be wagging their tail. When dogs are happy and playing and happy to see someone, they'll wag their tail. Now, there are some differences you can look for in a dog's tail wag. For instance, most dogs who are really happy and are wagging their tail to communicate that, their tail will be pretty like middle ground. It won't be straight up or straight down, and they'll wag it just really loose side to side. Like there's not a whole lot of intention to where they're wagging their tail. They're just kind of flapping it back and forth because they're happy and not worrying about it. Now, if a dog's tail is straight up and really stiff and wagging really fast, that might be more that they are stimulated, which can mean a whole bunch of different things. It could be a dog is enjoying what they're doing. It could be they're not. And same with if their tail is down and just the tip of their tail is going really quick. That could be them being engaging and friendly. It could be them being really nervous. So I think the takeaway from this is just not to assume that a wagging tail necessarily means a happy dog. And if you see a dog wagging their tail and you're not sure what that means, just look at the rest of their body language. What they're doing with their face and body will tell you what that tail wag means. For instance, the dog on the bottom left, you can see that there's relaxation in her face. She's looking up at someone, and I think she's happy about it. And the cool thing is that if you start noticing tail wags and comparing that to the rest of the body language that you see the dog doing, you'll start to notice correlations between the wag and the dog's mood. And over time, you probably will start picking up on what those different styles of tail wagging means, and then be able to use that to read the dog's body language in itself. Now, another thing that dogs do that is understandably difficult for people to understand and pick up on sometimes is their intention when they flip over on their back. It's perfectly reasonable to think that when you're hanging out with a dog, especially if you're petting them and they're enjoying it, if they flip over on their back, that they want you to rub their belly. And sometimes that's the case, but that's not the only reason dogs will flip over on their back. Sometimes dogs will flip over and expose their stomach to do what we call a tap out. And what that is is them asking for space and saying that they are uncomfortable. By flipping over on their stomach, that is complete vulnerability for them. So it's kind of like putting their hands up and requesting that things slow down. So you can usually tell if a dog is tapping out or engaging, asking for a belly rub in the same way that you look at the rest of their body language. For instance, the dog on the bottom, you can see her eyes are really wide, her face is really tense, her tail's tucked between her legs, and her body just looks stiff. Usually if dogs are tapping out, they'll hold themselves really still, and they'll have their legs tucked in, and they're not really moving around much. The dog on the top too, it looks like she's looking away. And of course, it's hard to tell in pictures if a dog is stiff or moving. But the two on the left, I would say they're pretty stiff, and probably not wanting their bellies rubbed. Now the dog on the right, again, it's a little hard to tell with still pictures, but I can tell you from having taken that picture that she was wiggling back and forth, her tail was wagging so much, she was shimmying with her hips. And what you can see is that her body is kind of curved to the side, so it doesn't have that same rigid posture that the other two do. And you can see that her face is so loose and relaxed that her ears and the skin on her face are just kind of flopping backwards. So that's a dog who probably would enjoy a belly rub. And, you know, if you're not sure, just look at what their body language does with any interaction. If they like the pets, they'll tell you with their body language. So that's a good segue onto talking about cats for a moment. Cats also tend to be misunderstood when they roll over on their backs. Cats use their body and face to communicate constantly, but a lot of their body language signals aren't all that intuitive to people. So they kind of get a reputation as being unpredictable or hard to read, which is a shame because they really do their best to communicate. They communicate all the time. So when cats flip over on their back, I know a lot of people have been in a situation where they're hanging out with a cat and they flip over on their back and you go to pet their belly and then suddenly you have an angry cat attached to your arm and running away, which can be really confusing, understandably. But when cats roll over on their back, it's a huge sign of trust. Their bodies and their bellies in particular are extremely sensitive, and not that many cats enjoy being touched there. So by exposing their belly to you, that's the biggest compliment they can give you. But by reaching down and touching it, that's not what they intended, and it's going to take it a step too far. So if a cat rolls over for you, just take the compliment and give them some scratches on their head or cheek, which is something that they generally really like. So we're going to talk just the basics of cat body language. And here are 4 pictures of cats who I believe are pretty happy and relaxed based on what they're doing. So take a moment to read the bullet points, some things that you can look for in happy cats. There are a few things that I bolded that I think are especially important to look for. That their face and bodies are really relaxed, just like dogs. That's probably the best indicator of if they are happy and comfortable or not. Also, always look at their eyes. If they have those soft almond-shaped squinty eyes, that's a really good sign that they're feeling comfortable. Okay, moving on to cats who are a little uncomfortable. Here I highlighted when they turn their ears to the side a little bit, because that tends to be one of the first things cats do when they get a little uncomfortable. So kind of like the tongue flicks and the yawning for dogs, if you notice a cat turn their ears to the side, that's your cue that something's making them a little uncomfortable. And if you can, fix that before they move on to giving you more signals of stress. Another thing that I want to highlight is if cats change their movement to either being really slow or really fast and rapid. When cats are comfortable, they're graceful. Their movement is very fluid, but they're also hunters and they're prey animals. So when you see them start to go really slow and move really fast, that's them turning into that more defensive predator and prey mode. So that tells you that they're on guard about something, and they're not quite comfortable. So yeah, take a look at these guys, see what you can notice. And we will move on to cats who are really scared, really stressed. All 4 of these cats in pictures, those are cats that I wouldn't attempt to touch because they look very scared, very uncomfortable. The biggest thing to note is if a cat is completely frozen like a statue, that is a cat who is not trusting, who is in a defensive mode, especially if they're really tightly curled up, hiding up against a wall or a corner and are facing out towards you. That is the most defensive posture that cats can do. That's what feral cats do when they're in uncomfortable situations. And that's when pet cats do when they're terrified. Another thing to look for is when their pupils get really dilated. I like to encourage people to get into the habit of noticing a cat's pupils as soon as they approach them. When a cat is stimulated for some reason, which could be fear, stress, could be play or something else too, their pupils will get really big. So even if their body language otherwise seems neutral or okay, if their pupils are really big, then you know they're having some sort of physiological response to feeling something, and they might not be quite as relaxed as they seem. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about bringing a new pet home when you already have pets in your family. And first, if you're bringing a new dog home when you already have another dog. Now, if you adopt from Berkeley Humane, we encourage you to do an introduction between your current dog and your new dog at our facility with our expertly trained staff and volunteers. So you know if they're going to get along before you even take them home. And if there's any bumps in the road for their initial meeting, then we can help you come up with a plan to set them up for success when they do get home. Now, if you're bringing a new dog home from somewhere else and doing the introduction yourself, first thing to do is find an area that's neutral for both dogs, so that your dog doesn't have the extra element of having a new dog in its territory. So this can be a friend's house, sidewalk, quiet park. Get another person to help out and introduce them while they're on leash. Now, of course, you want to have them on leash so they're secure and you can pull them apart if needed. But the tricky thing is that dogs tend to have a little more difficulty greeting each other if they're restrained, because they know that that tight leash means that they don't have the freedom to move around fully as they please and that they can't escape. So a nice middle ground to help dogs feel comfortable and like they have that freedom of movement while still having them secure is to keep the leashes really, really loose while they meet. I like to go so far as to hold my arm all the way out and hold the leash over the dog and then move around with the dog so that the leash is staying over them and not putting any pressure on them. So hopefully the dogs will hit it off right away. But if they're a little tense after a few moments of greeting each other, try a sniff and stroll, where you let them sniff each other for just a few moments and then walk next to each other. And that forward movement can help diffuse some of the initial tension of them first meeting another dog. And you can let them interact if they want to. You can take breaks and separate them, but keep things moving until they're showing really comfortable, friendly behavior. Now, do expect that you'll need to do some sort of management as your dogs get used to each other, and possibly for life. They're forming new relationships. They're going to have disagreements every once in a while. It's okay. And if you're set up to help them through that, then it'll keep things as peaceful and happy as possible. Make sure that they have their own things, their own food and beds and toys, and that they're both getting plenty of attention from you as a pair and as separately. If you are introducing a dog to a cat or two cats to each other, it can be a little trickier since cats don't regularly interact with members of their own species or different species out in the world the same way that dogs are used to meeting other dogs for the most part. So, when you're introducing pets to each other in your home, perhaps the most important thing is that everything stays positive as much as possible. Get really special treats that your pets have never had before or really, really like. It doesn't hurt to get some special toys to use while they're meeting each other. And make sure that what you're doing, your voice, your presence stays calm and positive because they'll feed off of you. It's a good idea to let them get to know each other through scent initially. Both dogs and cats have really profound senses of smell. So if they're able to sniff each other underneath the door or smell each other's bedding and toys, they'll already start to have a relationship by the time they actually see each other. Now, when you do start introducing them, start with really short, gradual sessions. I like to let them see each other from as far apart as possible, even if that's opposite ends of a hallway or opposite ends of a house. Let them see each other, close the door, separate them, and then they get their special treats and toys, and it's all happy. And then as time goes on, you can let them see each other for slightly longer and longer, and slightly closer and closer, but always keeping it short enough so that they don't have the chance to get overwhelmed or scared. Really, really go slower than you think. Because if they have a chance to get scared and hiss and bark, then you're going to have a negative association to override on top of having them form those positive associations that you're trying to get. And of course, do expect to continue their management as well. I strongly recommend that when cats and new cats or cats and dogs come into the same home, that they stay separate when you're not in the house supervising them for a long time, months, until you are 100% positive of their relationship. So hopefully, if you bring a new dog home, they will become best buddies and they will want to play right away all the time. So last thing we're going to talk about is just some basics of understanding the communication that dogs do when they're playing. Play is basically sparring. It's pretend fighting. So there's a lot of things that dogs do to communicate to one another that it's all in good fun, that it's just pretend. One thing you'll see a lot is what we call a play face, and that just is their expression is as loose and silly and goofy as possible. It's the opposite of that tension in the face that you see for stress dogs. So you can see especially the picture on the top right, how their mouths are open and just flopping, and it's big and goofy. Same thing with their body movements. In play, you'll see a lot of really exaggerated, bouncy movements. Again, it's kind of the opposite of that stiff, on guard, staring stance. And one specific thing dogs will do when they first start playing, especially, is they'll play bow. And that's where they crouch down on their front legs, in effect, to make themselves smaller to communicate that this is all in fun and they're making themselves vulnerable. The dog on the bottom picture, the gray one, is playing tug with another dog, but her stance is basically a play bow. And you'll see a lot where they play bow, they crouch down, and then they'll bounce off in the other direction and say, hey, chase me, which is really cute. So as dogs keep playing, there are some things that you can be sure of and some things you can watch for to make sure that everyone continues to have a good time. One thing to be aware of is your dog's individual play style. A lot of dogs have ways that they prefer to play. For instance, a lot of dogs prefer to more just interact politely and be around each other without a lot of physical contact. Some dogs are all into wrestling and like to go as rough and tumble as is possible. Some dogs just want to chase each other nonstop. So you can see where if you have a dog who only wants to wrestle and a dog who really just likes hanging out next to each other, how that could create tension really fast if they try to play with each other the way they know how. As dogs play, you should see constant invitations to keep going and communication between them. Just looking at each other, doing play bows, big bouncy movements. And you should always see each dog listening to the other one. It's not uncommon for one dog to push another dog's boundaries and have that dog tell them that that's too far. Might be a quick snap, a quick snarl. That's fine. That's appropriate communication. As long as the other dog listens to that and backs off. If they don't listen to that and keep doing the thing that their playmate was saying, no, I don't like that, then that's where tension can arise. One thing dogs will do a lot when they're playing is called self-handicapping. And that means that they make themselves smaller and more vulnerable to level the playing field, especially if one dog's bigger or stronger than the other. A wonderful example of self-handicapping is the picture on the bottom left, the 70-pound dog who is rolling on its back, making itself really easy for that tiny puppy to tackle. And the last thing you really want to look for in watching dogs play is that they're taking turns. They're switching back and forth. In healthy play, they take turns. Who was the aggressor? They should be switching back and forth. Who's chasing? Who's being chased? Who's on top with the wrestling, etc. And it doesn't have to be 50-50, but you should see some back and forth. Now, sometimes there will be play that goes more in one direction, and you might not be sure if all dogs are having fun. Tension can build with play. And the best way to make sure that each dog is enjoying themselves is with a quick consent test. Now, this is really simple. All you do is take a moment to restrain or pick up, if they're really small, the dog who's being a little more bold and forward, and see if the dog who is, you're not sure if they're having as much fun, see what they do. If they stay there and keep engaging in play, then that's them saying that they're consenting to it. They're enjoying this interaction. But if they take that moment that you're holding the play aggressor back to leave, then that means they want to leave and they just haven't had a chance. So if that happens, let them go in the play session, do something else that they like. Sometimes things will seem like they're getting a little intense and they just need a little help from people to distract them. And this is an interrupt. And you can do this as easy as just getting their attention by clapping your hands lightly and saying, hey, hey, hey. Whatever you need to do to get their attention just for a moment. And a lot of times that's enough to break up that tense moment, and you'll see them go back to healthy play. If you're having trouble diffusing tension just by those little interrupts, one or both of the dogs might need a break, and that's completely fine. Just take them out of the play session for a minute, walk around, give some treats. If they know some obedience, that can be really good to help kind of bring their energy level down and have them refocus, just doing some sits and downs, and then see if they're ready to play politely again. And dogs do have their limit for play. They'll get tired and their fuses will get a little bit shorter. So if things seem like they're too tense, then that might just be the sign that the play is over. Most importantly, everything coming from you should be positive, especially when you do these interrupts. It is a distraction, not a scolding, not a punishment. For one, just keep in mind that they're not doing anything wrong. They're just being dogs playing with each other and they just need your help. So scolding them is only going to add to their tension. If they feel that negativity coming from you, that's only going to make them feel more unsure and more stressed in that situation. And that can actually accelerate tension really, really quickly. So even if it's nerve-wracking for you, which it can be, seeing dogs play fight can make people uncomfortable, even if you logically know that they're having fun. So just make sure that you're keeping your tone and your presence light and really happy, and then you can see your dogs keep having fun. So we can watch just a couple quick video clips of a few dogs playing, and there's a couple things that I want you to look out for. So in this first video is dogs who really like playing chase. and in particular, a big gray dog who really likes being chased. So look at his body language, his movement, his gait is very bouncy and exaggerated and silly, and he's just has this loose, silly, open grin, really good play face. And watch for his invitations for the other dog to keep chasing him. So that says that he's having fun and not just getting chased and chased. See how he keeps coming back to the other dog and isn't just running away. So this next video is of two puppies who are doing more rough and tumble play. So watch for their bouncy, exaggerated movements too, and what they're doing with their faces. Big, wide open mouths, swinging all over the place. Watch for little taking turns and even a little bit of self-handicapping, one or the other dog making themselves a little smaller. See, they're having fun. So in this last video is a bunch of little dogs who are more just coexisting and hanging out with each other. And I want you to keep an eye on one little white dog who is starting to get a little uncomfortable and eventually tells the other dog that it wants space and asks to leave, and it got to leave. But really watch its body language leading up to that moment and see what signs you can see where it's starting to get a little more stressed. See, its head's kind of tucked down. It's kind of making rapid movements. Yeah. And then everyone kept playing and it was fun. All right, so that's a wrap. So we have a little bit of time to take some questions.
Yep. And so we've got 3 questions so far.
Okay.
And for anybody else who's got a question, feel free to use the Q&A function, which is on the menu bar on the bottom. So the first question is, it seems like my dog flips on his back when he wants me to pick him up, and also before we put his harness on to go out. And so does that make sense? Sort of what is that dog trying to say there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And full disclosure, can't know for sure without actually seeing and meeting the dog in person. But my guess would be that that's a tap out, and that he might be a little uncomfortable being picked up in those situations and putting his harness on. And if he is okay being picked up and having his harness put on, then that's good. That means he's tolerant and being passive with it. But that might be a sign of him kind of thinking like, oh, this thing that I'm not totally comfortable with is coming, and might flip over to try to say that. Now, that's not a bad thing. That's really, really common for dogs, especially when it comes to handling and having something put on their body. So what I would recommend doing is get him used to those things more and give him some really positive associations. For one, when you're putting on his harness and picking him up, make sure that your voice is conveying that it's a good thing. So really happy praise, light, happy talk, so that he's feeding off of you that this is something good. And I also recommend using some special treats to give him really positive associations with this. So you can practice. You can act like you're going to pick him up. Just put your hands around him, stop, give him a treat. Do that randomly throughout the day, so he's learning that those signals that you're going to pick him up mean something good is coming, not something he might not be comfortable with. And same with this harness. Just build a more positive association with it being put on. You can start by just putting it over his head, giving him a treat, and taking it off so that it turns into more of a game and something he really looks forward to. And I bet that with some time, you'll see his flipping over on his back start to be replaced with some really loose, happy body language when you do those things.
Awesome. So the next one is about communicating boundaries, and I guess this person's dog will sometimes lunge to communicate a boundary. And so is that something to be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very clear signal that a boundary is being crossed and that there's some discomfort there. So I would definitely recommend listening to that and not pushing the dog forward any further when they do that behavior. And try to see if there's anything leading up to that lunging moment that you can identify and use as the signal instead. For instance, if you're in a scenario where your dog would usually lunge at some point, watch for their body to stiffen, watch for their eyes to get a little tense, and react in the same way you would to a lunge when you see those more subtle signals of discomfort. And then meanwhile, just like with the picking up and putting on the harness, try to get him more comfortable in those situations. And it's, difficult to advise without knowing the whole scope of things. And if it's something you really want to work on, I strongly recommend you contacting our training department, and we can really help you set up a plan to get your dog more comfortable. But whatever those scenarios are, create some positive associations by giving him treats. It can be just little bits of cheese, and toss him one every few seconds when you're doing whatever it is that makes him uncomfortable. But definitely watch out for those signs that are leading up to that lunge, because that is a very clear signal that he's giving you. So I would listen to that.
Right. And then the next question is, we've had it a couple of different places, is about learning, teaching the dogs to respect other dogs' boundaries. So when a dog gets snapped at, and helping them react in an appropriate manner.
Okay, I think I understand that question. So for the most part, I believe in letting dogs teach each other those things. And it's not uncommon for people with best intentions to get too involved in dogs communicating with each other, and can actually muddle things. So assuming that both dogs are confident, well socialized with other dogs, don't have any fear or history of actually becoming defensive with or biting other dogs, let them talk about that with each other. Dogs communicating to one another is always going to be more clear to them than anything we can try to do to communicate with them, if that makes sense. So when they are learning each other's boundaries, try to keep hands off, and give them some space, as long as you're still seeing all of that loose body language, they're listening to one another. And then if it's clear that they're not learning to respect the other dog's boundaries, which you can usually tell pretty fast. The dog will give them a signal. They'll snap their head towards them, or growl or snarl really quick, and the other dog will back off and respond, or they won't. And if they're not learning to respect each other's boundaries, then separate them, do something else, because letting them continue when they're not communicating effectively is only going to make things worse. And I hesitate a little to go any deeper into what to do if dogs aren't learning to communicate with one another, because that can mean so many different things. So again, if that's something that you or anyone is struggling with, I'd encourage you to contact our training department, and we can give you more help in that regard. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it answers several of these questions.
Great.
And then the next thing that a couple of folks were asking about is when the dog's fur goes up or raised hackles, and what does that mean?
Yeah, so that's called piloerection, technical term. It can mean, a number of things. It usually comes down to some sort of tension, dogs will, or the idea is that they'll, their fur will stand up. It makes them bigger. It makes them seem a little larger, which might help them be a little confident. So again, I go back to what else is their body language saying. If they're stiff, if their ears are back, and you see that hair up, that piloerection, that's a sign that the dog is very uncomfortable. If they are in the presence of a person and you see that hair up, that means they're very uncomfortable. In those situations, I would take that seriously and really back off and give the dog space. Now, the caveat to that is when dogs are first meeting each other and when they're playing, you'll see some of that piloerection, the hair up as well. For instance, in the video of the two puppies playing, I don't know if it was clear or not, but both of those puppies had their hair up a little bit. So it's something that can happen while they're playing, that doesn't mean much of anything at all. So again, look at the rest of their body language, and that'll tell you if it's a negative or if it's just them being dogs.
Right. And so another question is somebody who's got two dogs, an older male dog that's 12 and a younger female dog that's about 2. The younger dog always wants to play with the older dog and the older dog is not interested. So any suggestions on that?
Yeah, so that's tricky. There's not a great way to convince your older dog that to be interested in playing with the younger one. So first thing I recommend doing is finding other ways to get that play energy and play drive fulfilled with the younger dog. If you have friends with dogs that are better matches for them, there's lots of opportunities to connect with other people who have dogs that want to play, even just next door, looking for other people who want socialization for their dogs is a good option to get him that dog play. Dog parks are an option too. They're not for every dog, but they can be great for some dogs. And then lots of play with you too, and physical and mental stimulation. So do even just basic training and training games will help keep his mind and body active. That won't make him not think that playing with your senior dog isn't fun, but it will help him put that energy in other places. I also recommend trying to find other ways for your dogs to interact, whether that is them having their own toys or food puzzles in the same area, going for walks together, anything that builds their relationship together without having the older dog's boundary crossed by the younger one trying to play with them when that's not comfortable with it. And again, if that's not a sufficient answer and you're still struggling with that, or you want more information, that would be a great thing to contact our training department for.
Right. And so then another question is about somebody whose dog is anxious and doesn't play, who is aggressive and fearful with other dogs, and any suggestions for teaching him how to play?
So that's a pretty big question, and that's something that I absolutely would recommend working directly with a trainer with. And the reality is that if this dog is truly uncomfortable with and afraid of other dogs, any attempts to make it interact and play are just going to add to that stress and make him more uncomfortable. So I think it's really important to let him avoid other dogs when at all possible. I don't know how he is with seeing other dogs like out in the world and on walks, but giving him some more positive associations when he is anywhere close to other dogs might be a good start. You can get a really special treat. It's even better if it's one that he hasn't had before and only gets when there's other dogs around. Have that with you when you leave the house and just give him little bits as long as the other dog is in sight. It won't necessarily make him like dogs or teach him how to play, but it'll help set that groundwork of other dogs are a good thing while you work with a trainer to help work through some of those deeper anxiety, fear issues.
Right. And then there have been a couple of what do these mean?
Okay.
And so the two behavior questions that people are wondering about is sort of the air covering something with air, sort of like pretending to bury it. And then the other one is humping.
Okay, so I thi- pretend burying things is just kind of an offshoot of the natural behavior to bury things. So a lot of dogs, most dogs are wired to dig and bury items that they're protecting. It's part of their instincts. And so they have that part of their brain telling them to do this, even though they don't necessarily know or understand why. So they will make that motion, even if there's not a point to it, basically because it feels good to them. It's satisfying to them. So there's no major rhyme or reason. It's just something that dogs like to do. And humping, that can also mean a number of things. It can be sexual, a mating behavior. It can be a form of dominance. It can be compulsive. It can be benign and just for fun. So the humping behavior is a lot more uncomfortable for people to be around than it is for dogs. And what it comes down to is the humping having any negative effect, or if it isn't? If your dog is playing with another dog and he just wants to hump them and the other dog does not like it, they're telling them to stop, and your dog's not listening and keeps doing it, then that's something you should discourage and prevent as well as possible. If your dog just really likes humping a certain blanket or the air and he gets comfort and joy out of that, then I say let him.
Great. And so we are coming right up on the hours. So I know we're not going to get to every single question, but this last one I think is real great.
Mhm.
And for everybody who's asked about whether this will be available, we have been broadcasting it on Facebook Live, so you can go to our Facebook page and find it. It's also going to be on our website in a couple of days. So this last question is somebody whose dog is great with other dogs, but not great at meeting new people. And so how can we help that dog, I think, just get more comfortable with different kinds of people?
Yeah, so that's another thing that I really recommend working closely with a trainer for, since that's a really wide subject that would vary based on the dog. But similar to the example of getting a dog comfortable with having a harness put on and helping the dog create positive associations with other dogs, it would be a similar method with helping them get used to other to people approaching. So first, prevent any situation you can where you know your dog can't handle that. If he gets really uncomfortable and people come into the house, set him up in the spare bedroom with some toys and a nice bed so that he doesn't have to go through that stressful experience. If he really doesn't like people approaching him while he's on walks, just politely ask for people to give him space. And then when you do start helping him learn that people approaching him is a good thing, you'll do it almost as if you were introducing him to a new pet in the house. You'll start out at a distance, really slow, giving him lots of positive associations, lots of treats, lots of praise, so that he's learning this is a good thing and not something scary. Mhm.
Fantastic. All right. So thank you so much to everybody who joined us. And for everybody who's got those real specific questions that Carly suggested to reach out to us, you can do that on our website at berkeleyhumane.org. And we hope you guys have a great rest of your day and a great day making your dog's day too.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone.